Welcome to Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately called IPA-USA. IPA-USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. You can find more about IPA World at ipaworld.org, and they have a conference coming up in Scotland in June of 2023. Or you can find more about IPA-USA at IPA-USA.org. And we have a conference coming up in October of 2022, so you definitely want to get to the website. So as part of our efforts to promote play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats, which are just conversations with folks who are just as passionate about play as we are. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can reach from our website, and our Facebook page, which you can reach from our website up in that top right corner, magically, a new Porch Play Chat will appear in your feed every Monday morning. Joining me, I'm Deb Lawrence. I'm the president of IPA USA. Joining me on the porch today is Mike Huber. Hi, Mike.
Hi, how are you?
I am wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. Mike has dedicated his life to serving children, families in the field of early childhood. He's been an early childhood teacher since 1992. He's the author of Embracing Rough and Tumble Play, Teaching with the Body and Mind, and Inclusion Includes Us, Building Bridges and Removing Barriers in Early Childhood Classrooms. He also does, he's also written a children's book, Amazing Erik, which you can find at Redleaf Press. He's presented, of course, to thousands of people about the importance of working with children with disabilities, creating accessible environments, rough and tumble play. And so Mike today is going to talk to us about removing barriers.
Yeah, so many moons ago, I talked about that idea of trying to talk about the difference between autonomy and independence, right? That for some children, they might not physically be able to do something or verbally be able to do something, but still we want to have them make decisions. So it's a slight difference, right? That independence would be, we leave them be, they get dressed and head outside in the snow. And autonomy might be that they're going to need help getting their legs through. Maybe they're, they can't move their legs or whatever. But they're going to still choose, they want these snow pants or this tag is bothering them. It might be about play and things. And so today's thing relates to that a little bit, but I think it's starting more with having the adults looking at the environment and trying to, one, predict what things might be barriers, but also, how do I say this? There's always, everything is a barrier to somebody. Right. So it's an art, not a science. There's no checklist, or you can have a checklist, but it gets really long. And then it's like, but it still won't actually work for everybody because there's always going to be a new child. One thing I know working with children with diverse abilities is there's so many of these cases of, it'll just say global delays, right? So yeah, so it's like each child, when they come in, does that mean they can't walk? Does it mean they have to use a walker to walk or a chair to move? Or does it mean they just, one child, like they can't use one of their arms? So I've seen the child, it's amazing, like his lunch, so a child in one of the classrooms can't use one of his arms, but he can use his shoulder. So it's like he gets the bottom of the lunchbox in the crook of his arm, the handle, and then flips it to get it up into his cubby because it's a little higher than he can reach. And with one hand, the lunchbox hangs down, so he can like flip it. So even at the age of 4, kids are figuring out ways, but there's no way a parent would have filled out the application saying, oh, he can, doesn't have the use of his arm in the typical way, but he still is using his arm, right? So until you actually see the person. So there's no checklist for removing barriers. And yet, as an adult, you want to make sure that you're making your environment as accessible as possible.
Well, and what I hear though, Mike, is what what, is good best practice, right? That you don't, this is your group of little munchkins, right? This group, not the group you had last year,
Right. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the group next door.
Yeah.
And so you really have to get to know those little munchkins
Right.
for every in every domain of development, in their ability to make decisions, it's individual. And so is looking at the environment with this group, right? Of so that every year, every maybe 3 months, if you get a new child in all the time, you have to really re-examine.
Yep.
Is this environment accessible for each child?
Right. And one thing, oh, go ahead.
Well, and I guess I want to go back to something you said before we started. Not every child is going to be able to assess every part of the environment, right? So what we need to figure out is how can we make the environment the most accessible to each individual child based on their abilities.
Yep. And I wish I had the actual source of this, because this is not my idea, but there was a phrase I've read recently in Miriam Loglovsky's new book, Loose Parts for Children with Diverse Abilities. And it's not her quote either. She quotes someone else. I just can't remember on the top of my head. But it said that every child needs to be supported and every child needs to be challenged. And that's the trick. I was visiting a church recently that just redid their playground, where they asked some children with disabilities, what they needed, and the parents, what they needed so that everything would be accessible to them. And now they have this thing where there's nothing to climb more than 2.5 feet maybe off the ground. And by the time I found out about it, it hadn't been in fact, they're still installing it, but the facilities person who took over hadn't been the one when this plan was made, like met me and learned about what I do. And was just like, I'm worried about this. And I think he has every right to be. So it's not installed yet. So I haven't seen it yet, but most kids are not going to have much to do on there because they're not going to be challenged. So what I think they're going to be doing is there's a chain link fence that I think is staying on the outside. I think kids are going to try to climb that, or they're going to go up on the 2.5 foot high thing and figure out ways to like maybe do a flip off of it. Something they're going to look for the challenge that's not there, that's not being presented to them. So, so when we talk about barriers, we're also not talking about every child will be able to do everything, but we're trying to find a way that every child will be able to do, I guess that gets into the autonomy, what they want to do, right? And so in some ways it's that, think of the verb that I think Dan Hodgins, talked about it. Lisa Murphy clearly often talks about it. But so if a child wants to climb, is there something they can climb that challenges them?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we feel those teachers who may not have had a lot of experience working with children with different abilities might be afraid of those challenges, right? Might think, oh, I don't want them to hurt themselves. And so sometimes I think we want to wrap them in cotton.
Right.
We want to put a blanket around them and keep them safe because they've already had, some challenges in their lives, and we want to make their life easier. But what we do is bore them, right? Or don't allow them to be included in something that they are perfectly capable of being included in. And so I think part of that is stuff, I'm old, remember, and I remember seeing a person in a wheelchair for the first time when I was 13 because they didn't have cutout sidewalks, until then, and maybe not even then. And she was just somewhere where I saw her. And I went running over to her because I had to learn to walk again because of my childhood injury. And I was like, what happened to your legs? And my mother was horrified, absolutely horrified that I was even asking a question. She was like, that's rude. Don't be. And I was like, well, her legs, it doesn't look like she could use her legs and I couldn't use my legs. And so, we were going to share our story, right, with each other. But I think we have this protective instinct, that protective urge, right, that each of us has about children.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that story is what you were doing as a child was seeing that other person as a human being, full human being, with you were interested in their mobility because you could see the wheelchair. And so you were noticing not just them, because sometimes people feel, oh, if you ignore that part of them, then you're seeing the human being. That's often that idea of, like, we talk about people with disabilities rather than disabled people, because somehow we're seeing the person first. And that implies that disability is an inhuman thing or a less than human thing. Because what's wrong with noticing the wheelchair? And you were seeing the humanness in that person. The thing that's rude is when you talk about the person as if they're not there. Like your mom addressing you and not the person right there next to you. And no offense to your mom, like a lot of people do it. I'm sure I've done it.
But she's a wonderful mom, but she was more concerned that I was, it's kind of like it's the uncomfortableness that people have. They don't want to draw attention to the person's diverse ability.
Yeah.
They want to, and so instead they're not honoring who that person is, right?
Right, exactly.
And so I think that's what we do as teachers sometimes. We don't want to draw attention because we don't want to embarrass the child or, but this is the child's life. I mean, this is who they are.
And they know they're in a wheelchair. That's the other thing, right? I don't think it's news to them. I don't think you as a 13-year-old were informing of something they didn't know. But yeah, we have that idea that just bringing it up will make it
uncomfortable for them when it's really uncomfortable for us.
Right.
And we have to face that. So sometimes I think that is part of the issue that we have in removing barriers. I think we want to protect them. We don't want to embarrass them. We don't want to draw attention to it.
And I will say, working with especially early childhood, my experience is that usually the parents are still adjusting. And most parents are non-disabled. So they are adjusting in the ways you just said. They also feel like, I don't want you to treat my child differently. I just want you to do the same thing you do with other children. And that's where, if you think about the verb of that, that's okay. Everybody needs to be able to hear and see the book or experience the book if they can't see or can't hear. That is the thing we want, but not, well, I just hold the book up and then the kids will have to look at the book. What about if one child can't see? No, you actually want to describe the pictures or have another child describe the pictures for the one who can't see. So we actually are just doing something different. It's essentially that word equity versus equality. We don't do the same thing for everyone. We give everyone the same experience, the same
opportunity to experience that book, right? Because you're describing what's in the picture instead of just reading the words.
And so some of it is going to be helping the parent know, oh yeah, I want your child to do everything the same too. We're going to give them the same opportunity. That's a great word to use with a parent. And so since your child can't see, I'm going to describe the pictures. There may be other children who didn't notice some of it. They'll all get something out of that if I would have done what I did last year with a different class and just read the words, that wouldn't have happened. And that's part of it too, is anything you do will affect people you're not intending to as well. That curb cuts are a great example. They were done for people using wheelchairs and walkers, but they also help people with strollers. They help people who are, using a cart to move heavy things. So
bicycles. Oh my goodness.
Often those things, when we think about removing barriers, we actually remove them for other people too. And even people on bikes. I used to be, I'm still sort of a biker, but I used to bike a lot. I never thought about curb cuts as being good for me until they were suddenly on every corner. It's like, oh, it's so much easier to get off the road when I need to, when there's a curb cut. So thinking about when you go into your classroom, let's just say a school year, you're going to start the new year. You have a list of your students, and if there are certain needs, you'll probably have some information. So you want to look around, but the thing, so is there a wheelchair or walker involved? Because that's a wider space you need in each area, you know, and are you going to, is it things that, oh, anything I want accessible to the kids, there's a child who, you know, can't raise their arms above their head. I know that everything has to be really low, lower than I would have normally, right? And you do what you can with those. The other things I think you want to keep in mind is, in your experience, have you had kids who needed more space? So I often bring this up. My Rough and Tumble book talks a lot about this. We often, you know, in that sense of equality or fairness, think, oh, like if we sit in a circle, here's a carpet square and you get your square. You go outside of it, you're being rude or whatever. One, we could question, why do you even have the square? But you could also say, for the kids who need to flop around, and there are reasons for them to flop around, we could get into that, but just by observing, you know, every year there's 3 kids at least in your classroom who can't sit and listen to a book. They have to flop around and listen to the book, or move their hands,
or crisscross applesauce. Oh my! I don't think I was 21 and could do crisscross applesauce.
So, you know, but we know that exists, and yet we try to like force whatever you want. And that's some of the problem with separating our idea of a disabled kid and a non-disabled kid. It's like, there's a lot of children who take up more space for various reasons. And we see it every day. Every teacher observes it. And some teachers will ask me, well, how do I get the child to not take up space? Rather than, well, or what could we do to allow for that space? And so when you're designing rooms, part of it is just thinking, some kids are going to need to move quickly, you know, run or whatever. Where is the space in my classroom that they can? And if you don't design that, then you know they're going to run, because I don't know a teacher who doesn't have kids who run in the room every year. The only thing is there's some teachers who are figuring out where can they run, and other teachers who are like, how do I stop them from running? Right. And, you know, like by threatening to take away outside time or whatever, like it gets into these weird spirals. So when you're making things, removing barriers, you're not just thinking a diagnosed disability or special need. You're also thinking about, what are the needs of children that I've seen, typical or atypical, and you design. And then when the kids finally come in the room, you take a deep breath and know that there are things you predicted when you designed the room that aren't going to work. So I'm going to use an example quick of a classroom. So we have a summer program that just started. We're taping the end of June here. And there's a child that we just knew, a toddler. So often toddlers don't have diagnoses, but parents will mention things. And so this child kind of wanders, climbs on things. This room has these like kind of big steps, you know, almost more like tiered seating, you know, so they're not like that go up to the window. So kids can watch out the window. And right now there's a snapping turtle that laid eggs, and there's a bird feeder. And, you know, we have some nature in that window. So kids often climb there. So they've been redirecting this girl when she wants to climb over there, but they have the sort of standard toddler classroom shelving. So what is that, 24 inches off the ground? A little lower, probably about 5 inches lower than those steps that I just described. The child often wants to climb on those. And the teachers have been, oh, if you want to climb, go over, you know, go over to the window. So there's a thing, like I said, now it's been 4 weeks. When I watch the child, what I'm noticing is they climb up and then they want to crawl across, because the shelves go 8 feet and then turn and go another 4 feet. You know, so it's 3 different 4-foot shelves, 4-foot long shelves. And that's what she's really looking for. And it's the same height. So that's that deep breath of, okay, I've been trying to just redirect, but there's something else she's trying to do that the steps aren't meeting,
aren't helping her with.
aren't helping her with. And now what do we do? And this is like in real time. So I don't have an answer for you, except that me and the teachers are wondering, like, oh, is it safe enough? Or are there toys that tend to be down under the shelf? And so maybe that's the thing. This is where we're at right now. Maybe that's what we try to do right now is, oh, look, there's toys on the floor. If you fall off the shelf right now, that you could get hurt. Or I've been sort of pushing a little more about that. If you're staying like crawling, you're probably not going to fall off. You're pretty stable.
Mhm.
If she tried to stand up on those shelves, then I'd be worried, or I wouldn't be worried over by those steps by the window. So in some ways, I almost wonder if we just don't worry about it at all,
Mhm.
because the height is so
It's 2 feet,
tasteful.
right? Yeah.
And it's on carpeting and and an occasional toy, but even that I would just move as the adult.
Mhm.
I don't, if it was a preschooler, I might say, let's look and see. Like in the last time I had my own classroom, I had preschoolers and they want to run. Let's first make sure there's nothing we could trip on. And preschoolers are a little more able to kind of scan the whole space where they plan on running and move it. But that's just an example where the teachers had planned, they had those steps by the window, but it's not working for this child. And we're interested in a lot of things. The child is, kind of like, oh, I want to go see I hear something out in the hallway. I want to go out there. And, so we know something more is going on with her, and we're still figuring it out. But that idea that you do what you can to remove barriers, then you have to watch and figure out what's going on. And I think the other side, like in my book title, I talk about removing barriers and building bridges.
Mm-hmm.
So some of it is going to be this girl starting to notice what other kids are doing, or to like, oh, we're staying in the classroom right now. See,
Mm-hmm.
her other classmates there's some over here doing this, and there's some over here, and kind of getting her to notice socially what's happening. Right now, she mostly connects to adults.
Mm-hmm.
So now I just often, if she's trying to go outside, I open my arms up and call her name, and she'll run in. She likes to run right into me, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Toddler, the toddlers don't slow down when they get crash into me, and then a hug. But I also know that this, getting pressure right here is a calming thing. And for some kids, it's going to be that slapping.
Yes, it's that slapping, right?
Some people, it's going to be a gentle hug.
Mm-hmm.
But for her, it seems like, okay, that actually grounds her and it gets her to notice what I'm doing. And so I am starting to notice what things draw her in, what doesn't. So that to me is the bridge.
Right.
We can remove barriers, but we also need bridges into things. Sometimes it's more the child doesn't have the motor planning, or they're not noticing kind of socially what's going on. And so explaining the game that's happening. I think I told the story Porch play many moons ago of the child was watching other kids play this. Basically, they're hiding a toy and then everyone's trying to find it. Like all the kids are going to sleep. But for one child, that the teacher had to ask, so when you say going to sleep, are you talking about just laying down and closing your eyes? Child says yes. And then she turns to the other child who's not understanding, like, did you hear that? We're laying down and closing our eyes when he says go to sleep. Right? Because that child needed a really concrete thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying going to sleep, the child's thinking, well, I'm not going to actually fall asleep. They couldn't think of it in that playing, where most children would think of that as playing. Oh, I'm not really going to sleep, I'm pretending.
Mm-hmm.
This child needed that
additional
direction. And so the teacher was building that bridge to get them to play. And without that, the child was just kind of watching and just kind of like tapping people as they walked by, because he wanted to play.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that he could get a reaction if he just hit people on the shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
So in some cases, it's not as much a barrier as it is a bridge. But just that idea that no matter how hard you plan or how much you plan, when you see the actual thing, you're going to, just figure out, oh, what's preventing this child from participating?
Well, and I think the thing with your story with the little girl, I think what I always try to get teachers to think about is, what is the child trying to do? Right?
Yeah.
What developmental step are they trying to master? And
Right.
how can you make it in a way that you can live with it, right?
Right.
And it may not last forever. Once they get it out of their system and have reached that mastery of whatever it is they're trying to achieve, they move on.
Right.
And so sometimes we prevent it and prolong it because we're trying to control it instead of trying to say, yes, what is it? What is it that they're trying to do? I remember teachers, their mind over, the faucets in the toddler room. They turn them on, turn them off, turn them on, turn them off, turn them on, turn them off.
Yeah, and after a while, that's where I feel like, observe, like in a toddler room, what toddler room haven't you seen a child putting their hand under the water 10 times a day, right? Because that sensory input is so important. But I do also I think some people, when they hear that, like that, thinking about the reason why a child does something, there's a difference between a teacher, parent, those people, and what a therapist will do. A therapist wants to know the reason in terms of whatever you want to go into, executive function skills, maybe a physical reason for something, all of that. But as a teacher, educator, carer, parent, whatever, the way you said it, that you want to know developmentally, what are they trying to do? Oh, the water feels good on their hands. So you don't need to know how sensory integration works over time. That's, I think, sometimes people get stuck on, sometimes people will take a class and then it gets really into the occupational therapy terminology around sensory input and sensory integration and processing and all that. And the teacher's like, okay, now what do I do when I'm in the classroom? I've got 10 other kids and I'm trying to remember that. And you don't need to know that.
No.
What you do need to know is, oh, that child feels better when they're feeling water on their hands. And you might try, if you don't, want to have water running all the time, you might want to, could you get a pump in your water table that has running water that's just recycling the water in there, and then you just change that water once a day or whatever.
Frequently, yeah. And so it doesn't take a course in occupational therapy or even working with children with disabilities. It takes, what is it that the child's trying to do? And how can I make this something that's okay, right? And so, sometimes I would say, because the teachers would bring out the water table like once a week and the kids were over, on and off, on and off. And I said, perhaps they need water play more often. Try that for 2 weeks. And then they would go, they stopped turning on the water. And I'm like, amazing, right? But instead we're trying to control them. So I think that's the other piece, right? Is it your need to control the environment or to control this child's behavior versus what is the child trying to accomplish?
And that's the part of, I think I've used this phrase before on Porch Play chats, but I know I don't watch every single one either, but being on the same team as the child, right? So what you do have control over is yourself, and you can change the environment over time, but if a child's doing something, figuring out what they're trying to do, what they're getting out of it, what their goal is, and how can you be on that same team? So if it's not something they can do, I don't know, let's say they love the feeling of paint all over their hands, but they've brought it over into your, house area or whatever,
right, into dramatic play, right?
Play, let's go over here and do this. And so you want them to still feel the paint if that seems to be what they're really into. But you also have this other thing, but you still want to stay on their team. You're not just going to say, what are you doing over there? That's not okay. If you make it
Power struggle,
this, right? The power struggle instead of support.
Yes.
And some teachers are still in that mindset of, but I have to control the room or control the child. And I think what people find once they start doing this, once they're on the same team, you actually have an easier time as a teacher. You're not
So
stressed
much
as
easier.
much because when you just do this, some children are just going to do it even more, even though they don't care anymore, about the pain. But now it's like, well, I'm not just going to give in to you. Like, I'm going to start shaking my hands and have paint go everywhere, or grab another child so they have paint on their clothes. It's like you're escalating something that didn't need to be there. When you jump into compliance, what you're really doing for a child is dysregulating. Raised voice, a stern lecture, whatever, is actually going to dysregulate the child, which means they're using less of their higher reasoning skills. Now they're just going into the emotional reaction of, you can't tell me what to do, right? And now it's like, you've just chosen a battle that all adults know you will never win.
Exactly. And
Well,
you're stressed out, and the child's stressed out, and then everybody's stressed out.
Right. And if instead you figure out, wow, you're really enjoying that paint. Or I always thought, go to emotions. If it's something where it's, oh, you seem really sad, or you're really having fun with it. Joy is an emotion too. You're really having fun with that. I'm a little worried about getting paint on these things. And then depending on the child, you can ask them for what could we do? Or if a child isn't able to process that, you might, let's go over here. So either way, but you're not stopping them from the thing they're trying to do.
And I think that is the biggest, and that's a lesson for every child, right? It's not just children who have differing abilities. It's every child. Getting into this power struggle is a lose-lose.
Yeah.
It harms the relationship.
Right.
It creates additional anxiety and stress in the classroom. And so if we could just take a step back, and and some of that comes from our own culture, right? That some people were raised in a very controlling environment, and so you just have to say, I was raised in a very controlling environment, but that does not mean I need to enforce that on another generation, right? So you have to really reflect on, why am I feeling like this? I did that, and I know I've mentioned this before, but one thing that just drives me crazy with children is when they run away from me.
Yeah.
And
my initial reaction that I want to raise my
yeah. And I still, I'm old, and I still haven't figured out why I have such a visceral reaction to that. But I have learned now to take a step back and to reflect and say, this is all about you. This has nothing to do with the child. So you need to get yourself under control, right? But that's hard, because it's such a visceral reaction, and it comes from something that you experienced as a child, right?
Feeling of not being respected yourself, or something like that, maybe. I don't know. For me,
I don't know what it was. All I remember is one of the times, because I had multiple surgeries when I was little, until I was 16. But I remember all I remember is one time you had to go get a penicillin shot before you had surgery, and they always came in the night before surgery, and I was done. I was not going to have that happen. I ran through that hospital ward. They had to have 7 people chasing me through the ward. It's just so funny that is a memory that I have, but that was with me running. That wasn't with somebody else running. That's the only thing I can think of. But anyway, this has been fabulous. I think the knowledge that you bring, Mike, is a different perspective than teachers who haven't had an opportunity to work in an environment where you work.
Right.
Begin to see the importance of individualization. We should always be thoughtful about that. But then some of the strategies that you provide, or all the strategies you provide, really give them another opportunity to reflect on what they can do in that classroom. So that's why I love you and why I appreciate you so much. So stay in while I close this out. So to learn more about IPA-USA, please visit our website at IPAUSA.org. And until next time, keep on playing.